Good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry, this is like a family reunion. I'm Danielle Pletka, and I'm the Vice President for Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. I'm going to be extraordinarily brief, and I hope not do any discourtesies to any of our guests here today, but we've got a lot of them in a short period of time, and I want to make sure that in addition to Congressman Fortenberry and Senator Coons, who I hope will be joining us at the end, we will actually have time to hear from Administrator Shah, and then perhaps even, just have a little chit chat. It's really a pleasure for me to be able to do this with John Norris from the Center for American Progress. All events are better when we do things together, so I'm delighted that we're able to work together. Most of you already know who Congressman Fortenberry is. He was elected in 2004 to serve Nebraska's 1st congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's a member of the House Appropriations Committee and serves on 3 of its subcommittees: Agriculture, Energy, Water, and Milcon and Veterans Affairs. I'm just giving the abbreviation to make it fast. Come on over and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. A slight correction, I was just recently thrown off the Ag subcommittee because I requested foreign operations because I was so moved by Dr. Shah's leadership. So I gave up my first love to be involved in my new love, I guess. So anyway, thank you all for coming and participating in what is a great honor for me to be able to simply introduce Dr. Shah and highlight some of his accomplishments. On the outskirts of a large Central American city, there is a small bakery that's run by a group of women. And they work with a happy determination in 100-degree heat, making tortillas and donuts. And this area is gang infested. It has the highest murder rate in the world. And there's a certain functional poverty there, if you will. A mechanism by which people survive, get along to some degree, but there really isn't much hope and certainly limited opportunity. But in the midst of all of this, there's a little bakery run by women. And to watch them work with this determination, to see their ownership model take hold, to see the look on their faces of empowerment, vitality, liveliness, gives one a deep sense of inspiration. And how is this happening? It's happening because of the people of the United States. It's happening because innovative leaders like Dr. Raj Shah are creating the space for a new type of smart development that looks at an inclusive capitalism and creative forms of development, wedding the private sector, the governmental sector, as well as charitable intentions to truly empower people, utilizing the best of the market system, but doing so in a way that recognizes that there are some fundamental structural problems that we have around the world. In order for us to attack poverty and overcome desperation, we must think creatively. We have to have a 21st century vision of how to repurpose government and to use the advances of technology to fight off deplorable conditions that are an insult to human dignity and actually create significant problems of instability around the world. The American people do pay for this one way or another, and people ask me a hard question a lot of times. We have brokenness here. We have downward mobility. We have stagnant wages. Why are we giving all this money away? And it's the right question to ask. It's a good question to ask, and I answer it in one of 3 ways. First, I say, you know what? It's pretty hard for America to sit idly by while other people just die. It's not who we are. That's the fundamental reason that we do this. But secondly, we also benefit from that exchange that starts to take place, economic and cultural. And the third point is the military tells me, send us in last. Do everything that you can to develop wholesome relationships, communications, trust, maybe even a little opportunity that gives people that hope, that sense of belonging, a sense of identity, and keeps them away from manipulation by twisted forms of ideology or twisted forms of nationalism that can lead to belligerent behavior. This work of smart development that fights poverty in the name of human dignity is also essential to our national security. Now, we've had an extraordinary leader at the helm for a number of years now. And it is, in a certain sense, exciting to see him move on to his next adventure in life, but in a certain sense, a deep regret, because he's a new emerging leader that brings I hope this doesn't offend you, Dr. Shah, a sort of sophisticated naivete to government. See, he came in and started to ask questions like, why are we doing this? Shouldn't we be doing that? Well, those are difficult questions that we should all be asking in government, but sometimes we get complacent. We're carrying forward legacy institutions and the bureaucracies that surround them and the interest groups that develop them. And sometimes it takes a little shaking up of persons from the outside who are simply motivated by a deeper and higher ideal and want to do things in a smart and better way. And that's been, I think, a hallmark of Dr. Shah's leadership at USAID. He has an impressive resume at a young age. He served as undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, spent 8 years at the Gates Foundation, where he led efforts in global health and agriculture, as well as financial services. And then, of course, at USAID, he led President Obama's landmark Feed the Future initiative, which I think is a prototype model of this hybrid partnership between market elements, smart development, charitable organizations, and public dollars with measurable outcomes for the community's good. I've seen his work firsthand, and frankly, I'm very proud of him. I'm also proud to call him friend. Dr. Shah's career in public service, I think, should ignite a renewed interest in the ideals of good development and smart public policy. I think he has been central to the success that USAID has been seeing in these new models, and I think that will be his legacy. In the interest of doing the right thing, I think that's why Dr. Shah left the private sector and joined the public sector. But I hope in the future that he continues his work of engagement, as I'm sure he will, and continuing to challenge all of us with that sophisticated naivete. Why are we doing this when we could be doing that? In the name of fighting poverty, in the name of human dignity, in the name of supporting those who are on the margins, who do need our help, which is so consistent with America's values and so essential to international stability and really the right way to repurpose government for the 21st century. So with that, please help me welcome Dr. Raj Shah.
Thank you. I thought maybe I'd get to be Jeff Fortenberry for a while, which would have been fun. I just want to say thank you to Congressman Fortenberry. I have admired your leadership, and between our various conversations and our work together, your leadership of Feed the Future, and just the way you project your ideas for how America should lead around the world, you have helped me see that despite Congress's sometimes relatively low approval rating, there are superstars in the mix on both sides of the aisle, and I'm proud to call you friend. I really appreciate your introduction. I also want to thank Danny Pletka for having us here and the entire team at AEI, John Norris and the team at CAP. It is wonderful to see a bipartisan group of thinkers and leaders come together to talk about and think about how America should project power and leadership around the world. I would like to recognize, just for a moment, we have a lot of folks from USAID here, but one in particular is probably new to you, is Ambassador Al Lenhart, who will be our acting administrator. Al, you may want to put your hand up so folks can see you. And I'm thrilled that Al is taking on this challenge for the years to come, a good friend, a great manager, a great leader. Thank you, Al. And then I have the good fortune of looking around this room and seeing a lot of friends and a lot of faces from whom I have learned a great deal and genuinely been inspired. If you will forgive me, I won't mention each by name, but I do want to recognize Norm Ornstein. When I think of AEI, I think of Norm, and I always have, and it has always, for me, kind of put this institution in a special place in American public discourse, in a place that, despite our politics and which side of the aisle we're on, is about intelligent thought, innovation, seeing opportunities and doing it for the right reasons. And Norm, we love you and your family, and Judy, and thank you for being here. As I reflect on 5 years in the role as administrator at USAID, I am really proud to have had the opportunity to reflect and represent the best of what America is about, the values that Jeff talked about, in enterprises that start in the fight against the earthquake and the recovery in Haiti, to the more immediate effort to stop Ebola in its tracks in West Africa. I'm deeply proud of efforts that so many of you have partnered with myself and our teams on in the past years to build bold new public-private partnerships to end hunger, to eliminate preventable child death, to deliver electricity to hundreds of millions of people who still live in the dark, and to create an opportunity for justice and basic human aspirations for so many people around the world that still incredibly live, in fact subsist, in conditions that, despite our thoughtfulness, we can hardly empathize with and hardly experience ourselves. And taken together, my experiences over these past years has really taught me that when we pursue this mission with humility and respect and a focus on partnership and results, we can build the kind of political support that is required for America to really lead the charge to end extreme poverty in the coming decade and a half. And in that same time, I've had the chance to reflect on what others don't see, perhaps all that often. Often our engagements are, in fact, in the world's toughest hotspots, where development has grown increasingly relevant to how America engages around the world, but where it's a little bit more difficult sometimes to see the clear impacts of our work. Places like the Northern Triangle, where we're creating more than 100 youth centers in countries overwhelmed by violence in order to help stem the tide of unaccompanied minors by creating more opportunity and fairness and justice at home. Or in Syria, where we've helped a generation of refugee children, more than 8 million people that have been displaced inside of Syria or come across the borders, either go to school or lead a better life at a time of critical need. And while it's tough sometimes to prove a counterfactual, I would just ask you to consider what today's geopolitical context would look like without these efforts. If Afghanistan had 1/3 the per capita income, sky-high rates of child and maternal death, and no girls in school. If the Syrian refugee crisis had in fact destabilized and precipitated state failures in Jordan and Lebanon. If Ebola had led to the states in West Africa that were endemic collapsing, spreading the disease further in that context and creating undoubtedly exponentially more case presentations here in the United States. The 2010 National Security Strategy framed this reality. It talked about how we needed to elevate development in our foreign policy and in how America projects leadership around the world. But frankly, it wasn't all that specifically delineated as to what that meant. It was folded between paragraphs on increasing trade and reducing the deficit, and it sort of felt like it was one of many things on a list of issues that we need to consider. Last week, President Obama issued a very different national security strategy, one that offered an integrated vision of what elevating development in our global engagements and in our national security looks like. And these partnerships are not just national security priorities. In a world today of fierce competition where the international loan book value of the Chinese Development Bank actually outstrips the entire lending of the World Bank Group, we can no longer take for granted that the Western economic rules of transparency, level playing field, and economic participation will just naturally spread around the world. It is entirely likely that countries will choose alternative primary trade partners, alternative sources of economic integration, and an alternative set of rules defining their own economic norms. And entirely likely, if they do, that American businesses, investors, and households will be left out, not invited in to the growth markets of the future. So in this context, it feels appropriate to me that over the course of the last years, USAID has been called on to lead at times of crisis, from Haiti to Ebola, to take charge of major presidential initiatives in development, from Feed the Future to Power Africa. We fortunately have a seat in the Situation Room and at the National Security Council, and I know President Obama believes strongly that our development and humanitarian expertise needs to be represented in those types of policy deliberations. In fact, an elevated role for development in our foreign policy seems so natural and so required today that it's quite easy to take it for granted. Well, we shouldn't. 5 years ago, we were in a different place, overburdened with wartime contracting responsibilities and deep, deep, deep staff cuts. This agency had been stripped of much of its core expertise and much of its actual authority. Poll after poll indicated that Americans believed wrongly that 20% of their tax dollars were going to foreign assistance when the real number was less than 1%. And leaders on both sides of the aisle when I started had nothing but sharp words for me in my first confirmation hearing and budget hearings. Actually thought that that's what all of them were going to be like after that first round. And fortunately, that changed. But in that context, a lot of people advised me that, Raj, you should really keep your head down, stay out of the politics, and don't bring too much visibility to the mission and the work you represent, because foreign assistance is by definition unattractive politically, and if you raise your head, you're likely to suffer further cuts. And as I reflect back on the last 5 years, I'm proud to tell you that we have done precisely the opposite. We've embraced transparency, demanded new standards of rigor and efficiency, made tough trade-offs in our projects and our programs, including shutting down 38% of our total program activities around the world. And that includes shutting down 30 global health programs in countries around the world and shutting down about that many agriculture programs as well. Those were tough cuts to make, because I know that even in their least effective form, those are good projects and programs that make a difference in the lives of the poor. But we made those trade-offs so that we could invest where we thought we'd get the biggest value for our investment. We could operate at scale, and we could really transform the face of global hunger, of child death, of access to water, of access to education. We made those tough calls in order to convince Congress to help us recapture our budget authority, which they supported, rebuild our staff, which we have accomplished, and diversify our community of partners. So we are working with more local organizations and private sector partners in particular. Taken together, these efforts have formed the foundation of a new model of development that tries to harness the power of business, investment, and innovation to end extreme poverty. Instead of just hiring a contractor to build a road or writing a check to deliver health services, we built the U.S. Global Development Lab to have an entity that would connect us to our country's brightest minds and best new technologies that can achieve our objectives faster, cheaper, and more efficiently. With partners like Cargill and Coca-Cola, Texas A&M, and Duke, the lab is investing in high-impact innovations, from a low-cost infant resuscitation device to new protective suits for healthcare workers. And I see some of the inventors of that new suit in this room today, and I want to thank you for bringing your creativity to that task in a timely and effective manner. Instead of relying on policy papers from others, we're bringing together captains of American industry at places like GE and countries that are committed to real reforms in the power sector to create $26 billion of energy investments in power sectors of economies in sub-Saharan Africa. Instead of only giving away food during emergencies, we have reformed the way America provides food assistance, won some of the greatest flexibilities we've seen in 6 decades of American food aid in the last Farm Bill, and today making significant investments through Feed the Future in supporting domestic agriculture so people aren't dependent on our food gifts, but are rather standing on their own 2 feet with greater agricultural production and productivity. Feed the Future reaches 7 million farm households and has moved 12.5 million children out of a condition of hunger and poverty as a result. I could go through sector after sector in child survival, water, education, where this kind of transformation is delivering more powerful results. But most importantly for me is through this transformation, I have seen that at a time of seemingly uncompromising politics, where it seems like no one can get along with each other, the country's most conservative Republicans and often most liberal Democrats have been able to hold hands and offer support for this agenda going forward. I've seen faith communities from 80 countries around the world and both sides of the aisle come together at the National Prayer Breakfast last year to applaud our mission and celebrate it with an open heart. I've met Syrian American trauma surgeons from my own native community around Detroit who have risked their lives to return to Syria on a regular basis to take shrapnel out of babies. I've seen Google software engineers that I met out on their campus in California, but also in India, where they're working in Delhi's struggling schools to help children learn more effectively and get open access to curriculum and information. And I've joined business leaders with Senator Chris Coons in Delaware and Senator Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, Clemson, South Carolina, as they discussed how they're eager to make investments abroad, investments that can help reduce poverty, and want to hold the hand with a USAID or our partners to help facilitate their entry into those markets for commercial reasons and with good developmental results. Many of these new partners had never heard of USAID before, but today they stand with us as co-collaborators, as advocates, and as friends. And so as I've approached these last several days, I'd like to share with you just a few lessons that I believe can carry this work forward. First, I believe we must celebrate the people who do this work as national heroes. They do not often wear uniforms or win medals, but they do risk their lives in service of our country and our mission of helping those in need. From the Haiti earthquake to the Ebola epidemic, their courage and commitment represents our nation at its best. Just yesterday, President Obama, Senator Coons, Congressman Fortenberry came together to recognize their service and their leadership in the context of the fight against Ebola. And I think we should do more of that, celebrating their successes and thanking them for their service. Second, we know that achieving this mission requires not only celebrating exceptional people with great hearts and strong minds, but also a strong, empowered, and accountable development agency. From an agency low in 2007, when our operating expenses were just a shockingly meager 4% of programmatic activity, we've been able to build back a more robust, more capable, and more accountable institution. To those of you in this room that have to do this going forward, please keep fighting for having a strong, singular leadership entity that can take accountability for this mission, because our country deserves it and our national security depends upon it. Third, as part of that commitment, we do have to enshrine some of these recent successes into law through legislation. Many of you, I look around this room and I have great hope that that's achievable. I've seen Congress pass the Water for the World Act. I've seen the House pass Feed the Future and Electrify Africa. I've talked to members on both sides of the aisle who support the U.S. Global Development Lab. I would simply ask, as you all go forward, and I will try to help quietly from somewhere, that you fight to get this legislation passed in this Congress and at this time. And there's one particular priority that I want to highlight because I think it's politically achievable this year, and that is food aid reform. We have worked hard over the last several years to forge a new partnership between shippers, NGOs, and agricultural interests that has the potential to do something extraordinary. It has the potential to reach millions of additional children at crisis and save hundreds of thousands of additional lives. But it will also create U.S. jobs manufacturing advanced medical foods in places like Providence, Rhode Island, and New Jersey, where our partners manufacture these products. And it will simultaneously enhance our national security sea lift capabilities. That kind of a win-win partnership is rare to come by, and I want to ask each of you to fight to make it law this year. Fourth, we will always have to balance competing legislative and administration priorities. But our commitment to the values that underlie America's success and American assistance can never waver. And that's why across all of our work and all of our programs, we should have strong and capable democracy, rights, and governance programming. Whether in difficult to work areas like Cuba or Zimbabwe, or more accessible environments like Uganda or elsewhere, our support for civil society needs to be transparent and open, but it needs to take place. Because ultimately, partnering with America means accepting that America will always represent and fight for its values, and that's a critical part of our foreign assistance portfolio. That's why the FY16 budget this year has a significant reinvestment in democracy, rights, and governance programming, a 20% increase relative to prior years, and one that I hope Congress will fully fund. Fifth, while it is understandable that American global leadership is not going to touch or transform every part of the world, there is at least one area where we fall far short of our capabilities. In infrastructure, there is a more than $1 trillion deficit annually in just Africa alone, and it remains the single greatest barrier to creating true broad-based growth. At the same time, today, with low interest rate environments here and projected out into the future, there are huge trillion-plus dollar pools of capital sitting on the sidelines, seeking yields that they could get in emerging markets in the infrastructure sector. Pension funds, sovereign wealth funds would all love to be exposed to these environments. As I think about the future of this new model of development, I hope that the most creative of you will come up with ways of bridging this divide and taking advantage of a unique opportunity to form the foundation of impressive new partnerships, such as the one we recently launched with Citibank, SMBC, Sweden, and USAID, to try to come up with platforms to bridge this gap. In 5 months, the world will gather in Addis Ababa for the Financing for Development Conference, and in 7 months, they'll gather again in New York to set a new set of sustainable development goals. It's not every year that we have the opportunity to address both financing and the goals itself. And it's not every year that we do so coming out of such a strong track record of success with some of our core new model initiatives. We have the opportunity now as a community to come together and redouble our efforts to seize this moment, elevate and agree to a set of goals that focus around ending extreme poverty, ending hunger, ending child death, doing it in a measurable way between now and 2030, and financing that vision with creativity and focus and fundamentally public-private partnership. It's a vision that I think has demonstrated it can earn strong bipartisan support even when our politics are tough. It's a vision that I think has also proven its relevance to our security and our prosperity going forward. In closing, I just want to say thank you again to so many of you who have been friends, supporters, and colleagues. I think those of you in this field fully appreciate the major sentiment I have as I leave USAID, which is, at the end of the day, this work changes each of us far more than we change the world. And for that, I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Shah, for a terrific address. I want to hand the con over to John Norris from, John, I have to put my glasses on in order to read your title because it's long.
I'm just from CAP. That's all you need.
But no,
We're among
you're the
friends.
Executive Director of the Sustainable Security and Peace Building Initiative at the Center for American Progress. So you see why I didn't remember it. On the other hand, why don't you lead off? What we're going to do is just have a short conversation here, open things up to you all, and then hopefully if Senator Coons posts, then he'll say a few parting words. But John, why don't you turn things over?
And thank you, Raj. And thank you for all you've done at the agency, and thank you for spending a lot of time in public service. Audiences like this get to see the speeches and the travel, but they probably don't appreciate the amount of time spent in interagency discussions and dealing with State Department lawyers and congressional staffers and perhaps the less glamorous sides.
Are you implying that that's less fun?
No, I would never say that. Less glamorous. An observation and a question. One, I think Raj deserves tremendous credit, as well as not just himself, but also Andrew Natsios and Henrietta Fore, honestly. If you look at AID dating back to September 11th, it was really an agency that had been decimated by the budget wars and turf battles of the 90s. And when our country turned to it in time of great need, they found that it was in really, really bad shape. And I think under your leadership and those former administrators as well, we've seen four really important things begin to change. One is the investment in people that you talked about, and realizing that it can't just be a contracting agency. We need capable, smart people who understand development. We saw the policy shop stood up again, because it's really hard to do global development and do it well if you don't have people that are thinking about the best ways to do it. We saw an emphasis on monitoring and evaluation. And again, that only makes sense that if you're going to do this stuff right, you need to be pretty honest about yourself about when it's working and when it's not working. And then the last thing is really an emphasis on innovation and technology, particularly with the American university system. There's nobody smarter, better, more creative in the world at development than the brains we have running around on a lot of college campuses. And I think if you look at those four kind of key pillars, they're all hallmarks of when the agency has really worked well and been effective. So I think that an awful lot of credit goes for standing those things back up. And the question part of it, I guess, you know, that as you look towards your next career, next thing, which given the timing, I can only assume is either the evening anchor on NBC News or the Daily Show. Clearly, there's two things open, so you could go either way. But you know, British diplomats have the lovely tradition of writing exit memos back to the Home Office and Foreign Office and their successors as they leave. And I'm curious, having been through a very intense period and often tumultuous period, what advice you would leave for your next administrator, whose name we will hopefully be learning fairly soon.
Well, thank you. You know, part of why I was eager to do, oh, there's Mr. Coons. Nice to see you, sir. Part of why I was eager to do this was to get a chance to think through that question. And so the speech was very much intended to be that set of thoughts. The one thing I do want to share is I have been struck by how when you're willing to sort of embrace people with different backgrounds and maybe different levels of familiarity with this mission, but with the right intentions, if you listen very genuinely and very carefully, how rewarding that can be. And so, you know, I have learned a lot from Senator Inhofe, and I've learned a lot from Leader Pelosi, and I've seen them come together on a range of things that would surprise all of us. And it just makes me think that we represent a mission that's really powerful and exciting. And if we really embrace the basic elements of this model of public-private partnership, country accountability, results, and innovation, we can build these unique partnerships that will help us continue a trajectory of growth and success. So I think that's very much one of the things that the next administrator that Al will have to do in the meantime. But it's not just vested in one person. It's the whole institution and all of us that think about and write about and work on this together, I think, just need to wake up every day and ask ourselves, are we being open-minded enough to make new friends, to listen and learn from others that have different backgrounds, and to try to adapt the way we do things to create a bigger tent with more partners going forward.
I was really happy listening to your speech to hear you sort of double down on the question of democracy, because those of us who've known AID, and I was around during the great wars of the 1990s, so fun. I think that the disinvestment in democracy that happened over the last few years has been very distressing, not just obviously to people who promote it here in Washington and the NGOs that you work with, but also frankly overseas, where we've seen actually the tide of democracy and democratic life recede. The challenge, of course, is that is you talked a lot about security, and that I think that's very meaningful and really important to the American people, because as you rightly say, when people characterize development aid as handouts to foreigners, it's like there are plenty of people with their hands out here. Thank you very much. And it has to be understood as a component of a strategy that preempts the necessity of a military engagement, that builds the foundation of democratic, political, market economic life, that really is the strongest deterrent, frankly, to the sort of disorder that we see spreading right now through the Middle East and Africa. And what I wanted to ask you about a little bit was, first of all, how you see this working, and second of all, to think a little bit about a challenge for the future. This is unfortunately a perennial challenge, and that is that as much as I love the Foreign Assistance Act, because I love anything that's older than I am, the reality is that the entire infrastructure and the entire legal basis of so much that AID does is based on something that is, an outdated Christmas tree that was put in place during the Kennedy administration.
Well, I agree with that. I think characterization of the Foreign Assistance Act as an outdated Christmas tree. That said, I've been pleasantly surprised as we pulled together many of these newer initiatives and newer efforts. We would say, okay, well, that's going to require doing this very differently. We created the U.S. Global Development Lab. We created a new form of partnering with others that instead of having this strict kind of here's an RFP, send us a proposal, and we can't talk to you until we're done with our process. It has a much more collaborative process where we can co-create a proposal and then fund that proposal. And originally when we started talking about it, we thought, well, boy, that might not really be legal or consistent with the Foreign Assistance Act. But then as the team looked into it in more detail, it turns out we were able to figure out a way to do that. And over and over and over again, our initial instinct was, boy, that may not be consistent, and then they figured out the right way to get it done. So the only reason I say that is whether or not there's broad foreign assistance reform, which I would be super excited about, but may not happen right away. There is still an ability for USAID and others taking this mission forward to be creative, be innovative, and to really drill down on how you can make it happen even with the current legislative framework. And I think passing the Water for the World Act was really important because it showed that you can continue to pass big development and humanitarian-oriented legislation in a bipartisan way. And I'm hopeful the same will happen for Feed the Future, for food aid reform, for Electrify Africa, because that will change the way people think of what the baseline is. And the baseline will become, let's do things collaboratively, make sure it's public-private, make sure you can measure results and get leverage for American tax dollars. And that would be a great baseline for American assistance around the world.
I want to say a word or two about the democratic aspects of what AID needs to do and the challenges that you face especially in conflict zones?
On democracy and governance work in particular. Well, you're right. You point out rightly that in the last few years there's been a relatively steep decline in funding available for democracy, rights, and governance programs. There are a number of reasons for that I won't get into, but I will suggest the FY16 budget tries to rebuild that in a pretty prominent and focused manner. I still think there are two things that we all have to consider as a community. One, and respectfully, I think some of the institutions that have taken this work forward, because it is so values driven and because we so believe in democracy, human rights, and good governance, sometimes we substitute that belief for kind of results. And we still, even in areas where we're passionate about the work, we need to be able to document and to know that our investments are delivering results, that we're investing in technology and innovation and tools that will help us do that. And as complex as it can be to measure, are we really building freedom of movement for civil society organizations in Russia or Ukraine or Ethiopia or Uganda? We still need to come up with those kinds of measures and assess our own performance. And I think that's an area we all got to work on together. The second is we obviously need to take forward this work in the places where it's toughest to execute, which are closed societies. And in those closed societies, the commitment we make is that we are going to do this work as transparently as possible, not be shy about America's values, and not try to hide what we're doing. And we want partners to know that they're supported by us, and we believe that transparency is important, even in closed societies. So those are two elements that, as we go forward, we'll focus on.
Yeah, so I guess it's encouraging that the Foreign Service Act has so much in it now that you can find language justifying anything. A question about one of your signature achievements, and I think it took real political guts to take on the idea that we would spend more money, more of our development dollars in local societies and less through American contractors, NGOs, and other grantees, and try to bring down the overall size of RFPs and contracts. That is really important work. It is not at all sexy, and obviously risked alienating a bunch of people who've been key partners in the historic endeavor of development. So I guess two questions. One is, how do we make sure that we keep that momentum going forward, and that it doesn't just shift back with a change of administration or a change of administrator? And how do you make it so that it's kind of hardwired into the basic view of development? Not just that we're spending more money, but the actual building of capacity so that local societies, local governments really are owning development, spending more of their own resources, mobilizing domestic resources so that we can put ourselves out of business sooner.
Well, thank you, John. And I would say on the first point that this push towards local solutions earned me the opportunity to testify for the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, which I greatly enjoyed. And but I have to say, I think our mindset has often been misplaced when we talk about managing risk. We think of, a small NGO in Africa or in Latin America or in Asia somewhere is going to be higher risk than a large U.S. Beltway-based contracting partner. And I'm just not convinced of that. I think we do a lot of kind of compliance and reporting so we can have documents that check all the boxes and therefore absolve us from worrying about risk in this category. But I think we've demonstrated through our very significant acceleration of suspension and debarment actions, I think we're up 400% relative to the period before us, that actually this is also a risky endeavor, and sometimes
including some very big ones.
And some very big ones where there's some real fraud and abuse, and you can't take for granted, you have to hold these folks accountable. And then with the local partners, I think we do have to be a little more forward-leaning, because the goal of our assistance should be build local institutions that are strong enough so that we don't need to be there 10, 15, 20 years from now. And you're never going to get there if you keep sending U.S. contractors to do everything. So there needs to be a balance, and we've tried to articulate what that balance looks like. I'm proud of the teams around the world that are frankly, remember 65% of our overseas staff are Foreign Service nationals. They're often the most creative and the most connected and the most passionate about this work. And they've done some really exceptional things I'm very proud of. But we got to continue to give them the space. And our teams here have to continue to fight for the political space to make the goals of our work putting ourselves out of business.
Why don't we open things up to the audience for just a couple of minutes? I have Senator Coons here, and I can't keep him waiting too long, but if you'd follow our rules, just raise your hand, identify yourself, wait for a mic, then identify yourself, and put your brilliant statement in the form of a brief question. This gentleman right here, we have a couple of young folks with, yeah, if you could go to this gentleman in the tartan tie, I think it's tartan. That's you.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is John Oldfield with WASH Advocates. Thank you, Congressman Fortenberry, John, and Dr. Shah for your remarks. I'd like to give you an opportunity to delve into this infrastructure question just a little bit more. I'm particularly enthusiastic about USAID's Development Credit Authority. I wonder if you might give us a sense of what your successors could do in both the public and the private sector to prime that pump a little bit more, to shake loose some of those sovereign wealth funds and pension funds.
Excellent. Great question. The Development Credit Authority does local currency guarantees with local banks. And over the last 4.5 years, we've taken their portfolio of work from about $120, $130 million of total enabled lending to small and medium-sized enterprises in developing countries to this year, it'll be 1.1 or 1.2 billion. And the reason we've scaled that up so much is because there is plenty of local wealth, there's plenty of sovereign wealth, there's plenty of pension fund wealth that could be invested in developing country economies at reasonable and appropriate returns. Without going into the details, I think there's a lot to learn from the Development Credit Authority to use that kind of intermediation to unlock, tens of billions of dollars of infrastructure financing in developing economies. And Power Africa has started to offer us a little bit of a visual as to how to do that. But it'll be, I think, years of work ahead of all of us together, and I hope that the teams focus more on it, because if we don't make those investments, we won't achieve our goal of ending extreme poverty.
This gentleman right over here.
Thank you. I'm John Coonrod with the Hunger Project. Dr. Shah, I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about some of the remarkable successes in community-led development, because at a lot of what you're talking about in local solutions really are dependent on local leadership, local communities, the National Solidarity Program, a lot of the community development that happens out of Food for Peace. And what have you and the agency learned really works to have community development take hold?
Thanks, John. Two things quickly. One is good local partners, and the second is long-term partnerships. And so Food for Peace, because of some of the flexibilities in the Farm Bill, is going to be doing more of this work with longer time horizons. Our local solutions focus has allowed us to have 1,200 new local partners over the last years around the world, and I'm very confident that effort will be successful.
I'm going to take one quick last question from this young lady in the back, and then we're going to have to turn things over to the senator.
Thanks so much. Kate Phillips-Barrasso from the International Rescue Committee. The last few years, despite a lot of breakthroughs on other fronts, have been very difficult in terms of the level of conflict and disaster we see around the world. There's more people displaced than any other time since World War II, and it's hard to imagine meeting SDGs when so many people around the world are living in conflict-affected or fragile states. So I'd just like to hear some more thoughts on this quandary based on your experience. How can we address poverty around the world, not only by responding to humanitarian crises, but actually being more proactive in preventing them? What USAID's role is in that, in the broader U.S. government, making sure that we don't find ourselves in increasingly expensive territories like this?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it's particularly important for everyone in this room to really think about the answers to that, because I don't have them, but as we look over the course of the next 15 years and we set our sights on ending extreme poverty, the 1.1 billion people who really do live on $1.25 a day, the 6.5 million kids who die under the age of 5. Every year that goes by, the folks who live in that condition of humanity is going to be more and more concentrated in a smaller number of fragile states that are more climate vulnerable, they are more conflict prone, they have more predatory and ineffective governance, and the fight against extreme poverty, especially once you get a few years out from now, is almost going to be entirely about fragility of states, of institutions, The overlap with conflict and threat to the United States, as we have seen out of the Sahel and elsewhere, is going to be even more pronounced. And that's why this work is actually going to get even more important as we get closer and closer to ending extreme poverty. And it's going to be even more important that AEI and CAP, come together and create great bipartisan solutions that, whatever our politics are, like really smart leaders like Jeff Fortenberry and Chris Coons can get behind together and make real. And I think we've started to scratch the surface of what's possible in these 5 years that I've had a chance to be part of the mission. But your question highlights that this work will only get more important every day that goes by until we've ended extreme poverty. And we will achieve that goal, but it's going to require a lot of creative collaboration from both sides of the aisle. That's why I was so excited to be able to come here and do this talk at this setting with these outstanding partners.
Well, thank you for that. I am going to ask you two to stay here for just a moment, just as is, and just ask Senator Coons to come up to the podium. I'm sorry, I'm holding my microphone awkwardly, but let me just welcome him for a few words before he has to run away and we say goodbye. But just a sec. Sorry, I've got microphones everywhere. Thank you. Senator Chris Coons of Delaware.
Well, thank you, Danielle, and thank you to AEI for hosting, and John, thank you to CAP and to everybody who's here. It is so rare in the Senate that you get the last word on anything that I am delighted that the press of a vote prevented me from joining Congressman Fortenberry at the outset, and instead I get to give a quick conclusory comment. This is not a farewell for Raj. This is a thank you. God bless you. We are so excited to see what is next for you and a chance as a community to reflect on the progress that's been made and the challenges that are ahead. I've been a senator since 2010, and I must say, in my role as an appropriator and the chair of the Africa subcommittee in the Senate, no one has inspired me, challenged me, moved me, amused me, engaged me, frustrated me, offered me up, volunteered me, befriended me and challenged me constructively more than Dr. Raj Shah. I think what you've just seen in front of you is a reminder of what he has done as administrator that is so important, that this began with conservative Congressman Fortenberry from Nebraska and is ending with progressive senator from Delaware, that AEI and CAP are hugging and sharing ideas. Was there hugging? There was no actual hugging. There was no hugging. Let the record reflect there was no hugging. There was a brisk, vigorous, and entirely professional exchange of ideas. But if you think about it, embedded in all of Raj's comments are the sort of yin and yang of what CAP and AEI, what Democrats and Republicans bring to the table, to the challenge of international development and assistance. An expectation of measurement, transparency, outcomes, an expectation about efficiency and effectiveness, a relentless commitment to innovation and to finding new methodologies, new ways of delivering assistance and new partnerships, and a profound and deeply felt and spiritually moved passion for the work of relieving extreme poverty, of engaging the people of the world, on extending the reach of our work in democracy and in relief and in assistance in a way that engages and mobilizes the very best of what the United States brings to the world. This is a leader who has brought the private sector to the table, welcomed them in, mobilized their resources, and engaged them from the very beginning in a number of groundbreaking initiatives, who has deployed new approaches and new technologies to the challenge of foreign assistance and development, and who has held accountable all of us who are involved in some way in making that progress possible. Whether it's Feed the Future, which you were just talking about, Power Africa, which we are just excited with its first year numbers, the Global Development Lab, which I look forward to carrying forth my commitment to help get authorized. Yes, I haven't forgotten Raj yet. Or the work that remains in terms of Feed the Future and Food for Peace reform in a way that will make food aid reform real. There are so many different initiatives that Raj has launched and launched well and launched in a direction that I think is worthy of our attention, our affection, and our sustained support. I thought I was good at talking other people into doing things beyond what they really were capable of or comfortable with. Raj has pushed me, prodded me, encouraged me, or chided me into things beyond what my staff thought was possible and beyond what might be believed to be politically reasonable. That, to me, is the mark of a leader. Someone who doesn't just see dysfunction or tradition or existing relationships and accept them, but who is willing to risk upsetting people, risk upsetting apple carts, risk upsetting agendas, and relentlessly call forward in a way that is profoundly rooted in values and in a belief about what is possible. So if I could, just on a personal note, it has been a genuine honor, Raj, to know you as a friend. And you and Shivam have honored me not just by being friends here, but by visiting my home state. And you and your 3 beautiful children I consider family. And you have been a great blessing to me in the few years that I've been honored to serve the people of Delaware and this nation. I will not say farewell, because I know that whatever comes next in your life will be a remarkable opportunity to continue pushing the envelope, to continue that profound grounding of faith that has built a strong bipartisan support for USAID in a way that has been desperately needed in what has been difficult budget times, but that relentless optimism that lifts all of the rest of us up and pushes us forward. Thank you. God bless you.
With that, if I could ask everybody to just remain seated while we see Dr. Shah and our guests out, and then thank you all very much for joining us and for your patience with our logistics today. It was a pleasure, and we are done.